we started coming unstuck in front of some larger customers where their thought process was, you only ever get one shot with us. We did not approach it from a sell mindset. Previously, the idea was go in, wow them, and keep selling and like get the deal done and move forward. We completely removed the pressure of selling from two parties.
Today, I'm joined by Kartik from ComplyStream. I'm really excited to have you on. So firstly, could you tell us a bit about your background and then tell us about ComplyStream?
Sure, Amaan. First off, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you and also talking about my journey, ComplyStream, and how we've been growing over the last year and a half. So my journey, I always talk about, it's that of three pivots. Pivot number one happened just after the financial crisis back in 2008, where I left India after being there for nearly 25 years, moved to the UK to come here and do my master's. And predominantly the rationale behind that was trying to understand why are we doing certain things. So I was an engineer back in one of the largest banks in India, and I would always get these requests from people in the UK and US saying our month-end reporting needs to be done quickly, get this done, or year-end reporting, and so on. I would always ask, why exactly do we need to do this particular thing and how can we do it more efficiently? But they would come back saying, Karthik, you ask too many questions, just get it done, don't ask why. So my rationale was, let me try and ask you more, and maybe if I come to where you are, maybe that's where I can find answers to these questions I was asking. So that's how the journey started. Came to the UK in 2009, did my master's, and then I ended up joining JP Morgan because that is exactly what I knew. I then spent the next 10 years over several sub businesses at JP Morgan, just on this journey of trying to find out why do we do certain things, and if we do it, are we actually measuring the impact of it? And most importantly, who's actually at the receiving end of this? But I faced a very similar story there as well, where people were like, you just need to do your job. You ask way too many questions. If you need to find out all of this, maybe you should go to a smaller company. And that's what then triggered my journey into getting into a fintech. So back in 2019, I ended up joining this fast growing fintech called Tide. And the rationale behind that was maybe if I go to a smaller company, that's really where I can get to learn more about the customers and importantly, the problems that we are trying to solve. So I then spent the next 6 years. So that was my second pivot, and then spent next 6 years across multiple fintechs, predominantly to understand the why and solving problems for customers, and especially problems that mattered. But over these 6 years, what I realized was I was constantly working closely with end customers and also financial crime teams. And these people were at the front line of solving financial crime issues, and yet they were not given three things. So tooling, data, and processes. And every time they would complain about something, and I, as a product manager, my job was, how do I help you get to a decision quickly? And every vendor or a tool or a process that I would, review, there would always be something short. And that's when the third and maybe not the final pivot, but the third pivot happened in early 24, where this problem of financial crime and especially operations inefficiencies just became unbearable for me. I was thinking about it when going to bed. I was thinking about it when I woke up, and I was like, surely someone needs to do something about it. So that's how the journey happened with me starting ComplyStream.
That was a lovely journey to hear. I like the three pivots. And like you said, not the last one. There might be more in the future.
Who knows?
So tell us a bit about what ComplyStream actually does then. What is it, the solution? What's the solution? What is it that you're solving?
Yes. So ComplyStream is an financial crime operations orchestration platform. And that's a mouthful, but to break it down further, financial crime operations are plagued predominantly by three big problems. One is processes are heavily inefficient, where you have repetitive tasks that are being done by financial crime analysts, and especially in the first line of defense, i.e., these are the folks that are helping customers get onboarded, uh, preparing these customers to be not be defrauded, and also doing initial investigations around if there is some kind of break or an exception that happens, and especially resolving financial crime risk investigations. The second issue that you got is data is all over the place, where you do not have any rationalized data sets that can enable the analysts to get a real good idea of that customer or that particular issue that needs to be solved. And number three, you have systems that are heavily fragmented, so much so that you have the analyst who then becomes the connective layer between all of these systems. So what ComplyStream is aiming to do is using a single platform architecture, plugging these three big problems by bringing together systems in the same ecosystem, getting all of the data pulled and rationalized and actually understood by the analysts in the same platform, and finally using agentic and workflow automation to make sure that you don't have the analyst plagued by these repetitive processes. So in short, we are trying to build low effort and a high context setup for financial crime teams. So yeah, that's us.
Understood. Understood. And so at the moment, is there nothing out there that solves this problem, or is this really, cutting edge in what it does? And currently, people are doing things in a very manual process way.
So there are, thankfully or not thankfully, but I would say thankfully, there are cutting edge platforms that are coming up literally as we speak to resolve this problem of financial crime ops inefficiencies. But where ComplyStream really shines is our focus specifically on what happens after an alert has been flagged. And traditionally, what's happened up until now is two things have been very different. One, in the regulatory tech space, or as we call it, reg tech, you've had an advent of platforms that do things really well, but they do it in their own silos. And what I mean by that is you have systems that do really well in identity and verification or screening or doing onboarding, etc. But what you don't have is you don't have a single orchestration layer that takes care of all of that. At the same time, what's happened is with the advent of LLMs, and especially since ChatGPT came out a few years ago, people are now recognizing that we can actually build workflows and we can mine data in a way that is not so obstructive to remove any efficiencies that we might get from mining this data, bringing it together, and then actually having an agent that can learn on top of these processes. So with those two big changes happening, where financial crime and compliance teams no longer want fragmented point solutions, and you then have LLMs that are acting as a tailwind to automate these repetitive processes. And where we play is an extreme niche of this situation, where we only come in when something has broken. So we consider ourselves almost very similar to incident.io, where after an incident or after an alert has been raised, we come in and we fix it end to end. And we focus predominantly on the financial crime analyst experience.
One of the questions I always like to ask the guests that come on is regarding AI, because now obviously it's a big trend and it's used in a lot of businesses. But depending on the business, the use varies. So there are some business models where AI's use is limited because actually there are certain things that you can't just rely on AI. You have to manually build the processes and make sure that AI is used to, for example, provide insights like reporting, provide insight and analysis on something rather than figure out the underlying workflow or really build the whole product based on that. So I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you a similar question. Obviously, I'm guessing AI is a core part of what you're offering, but how have you decided where AI can be used and where actually it's not ready yet? The AI that exists today is not going to be strong enough to do what you need to do.
That's an excellent question. And especially with everyone talking about and not just talking, actually acting on it as well. For example, you had obviously Klarna, remove so many of their customer support teams and saying that we will have AI replace a significant chunk of the processes. I would argue that we are not quite there, where there are specific places where AI has worked really well, but there are others where it has not. And especially in a regulated operational setup, such as financial crime operations for our customers who are regulated EMIs, electronic money institutions, or banks, or payment services providers, you cannot afford to mess these things up. So for us, where AI has worked really well is across two areas. One is for our own internal use. So where we are, preparing things like long draft product requirements documents, that has now evolved to becoming a prototype where instead of having a long PRD, you can actually create a prototype in the same time or even less just using prompts. So for us, V0, Cursor, those have been like the primary tools that I would say from an internal point of view has worked really well, either use of AI. And of course, the likes of Claude. So we are huge fans of Claude, and that's what we use every single day. On the external side, from a customer point of view, where it has actually helped us is doing very specific things such as feeding a document and trying to understand, what is the type of that document? Does it contain the necessary data points? So very simple things such as matching entity names or individuals' names, etc., etc. That has been really helpful. And also we have extended that to finding out if a particular document is fraudulent, and you can give it like scan documents and we can read all of that and so on. But where it has not worked that well, or where we still are on the cusp of experimenting thoroughly and not releasing to customers, is where you need AI to be talking to the end customer themselves. And that is really an area where we want as much of the training done. So you have the agents that understand the context even more. And everything now hinges on the fact that how much data can you actually feed in? And when I say data, how many examples you can feed in. So that's where I would say there is still a lot of improvement that needs to be done. But on the other side, things like, reading documents, drafting maybe some emails that can then be shown back to the analysts, etc., it has worked quite well for us, I would say.
Great. I want to pivot more now to the business side of things. You obviously said it's been just under a year or around a year since you launched ComplyStream. Obviously, you're operating in a market where it's a very sophisticated buyer and probably not a huge pool of potential buyers. It's it's a huge topic, financial crime operations, but it's not a huge market. The number of players really in there, it has a cap on that. So, what's
Yes.
been your approach to targeting that market? I'm assuming you had a lot of connections and network and referrals that you brought along with you as you started the business. But what's the plan to really grow into a market that is quite niche?
Another fantastic question. We've had a change in approach, and especially as a fast growing startup, we have had to, like, we've been really forced to think on our feet and iterate constantly. So, the original approach that we had was leverage and maximize your network and get to speak with some of these larger companies and get to a place where, based on your credentials, for example, places where you've worked, the things that you've done, your general background, and also of the team, using that and using your network to open the doors. But what we realized as we went through this process, we started coming unstuck in front of some larger customers where their thought process was, you only ever get one shot with us. Either your platform is built to a sophisticated level, as you said, or it's not. And especially if I'm a buyer and I'm a large buyer, for example, I would expect certain things, which is where if I'm coming in as a startup and I don't have certain things or the product is not fully fleshed out. And what I mean by that is things like, do you have all the features? Are they all working? And do you have examples of other customers actually using it in production. If that is not there, then it just makes it very difficult. After going through that journey for nearly, I would say, 3 to 4 months, what we started realizing is a lot of our deals were moving quite quickly, getting to the point of either the decision maker or the budget holder. And that's where the deal would either start to slow down significantly or it would stall completely. So what we then did was we tried a different approach where we were like, yes, we want to maximize our network, but we started seeking two changes. One was the size of the customers that we were open to. And we were like, don't put us in front of a large bank or a well-established payment services provider, but can we look at maybe a slightly smaller customer that would have more appetite, but also they have a pressing need because they don't have the budget to go and hire maybe a large tech vendor or hire bucket loads of people. But the change number two that we did is as we went to these smaller, slightly smaller customers, we did not approach it from a sell mindset. Previously, the idea was go in, wow them, and keep selling and like get the deal done and move forward. But what we did this time round is we started asking them more questions about what their biggest problems were and trying to articulate how urgent were these problems and who exactly is going to make the decision upfront. And also, most importantly, do you have the budget or not? And that marked a massive change in the approach we took because we completely removed the pressure of selling from two parties. So it was us who was always under pressure saying we have to sell and close the deal. And on the other side, you had the buyer who we also removed the pressure of them buying. We said, let's have a conversation first. Let's build a relationship. Let us actually listen to you and then let's take it from there. And that has meant that we have gotten to a position where people have opened up. They've actually given us very direct feedback, either what's been amazing, what's not been amazing, but also opened about their critical problems. And that made it really specific for us saying, yes, we have things that we can give it to you right now, or we should not speak now, we should speak in a few months' time because these things will be ready then. It then makes more sense for us to engage or re-engage.
That makes a lot of sense, I think, especially in a world where what you're selling is a very complex product. It requires a lot of touch points with a client and probably needs a lot of education. It's not a decision that can be made just on the call to close them. So I think going with a relationship first approach, makes a ton of sense, and it helps you cut through the noise of other people reaching out trying to sell things, and it's a much more effective funnel. So are
Precisely.
you still though using is that still based on your current network? What's the strategy to grow beyond that and to really expand into? Because now that you said your ICP is probably on the smaller side, you probably have a wider pool there to play with. So what's the plan moving forward?
Yes. So we still continue to maximize our network. Thankfully, because of my experience and spending time in the UK over the last, almost 17 years, it's meant that I have a massive network, which I'm still able to source some of these really solid deals. But at the same time, we have switched to doing a lot of outbound and not necessarily cold calling. That is something I would argue that is not my forte, but it's something that we are also actively adopting. So with the advent of tools like Apollo or Clay and several others, we have gotten ourselves into a position where we are able to, and especially LinkedIn has become like the tool of choice for us to increase outbound and reach out to as many of these ICPs as possible, but still maintain the relationship building route. So even though it's started out cold, like for example, we were literally speaking to yet another South African payment services provider, and we literally found them on LinkedIn. And coincidentally, we were traveling to Cape Town around the same time. So we went down, reached out to them. This person only took our meeting because they looked at our website and they were like, this sounds quite interesting. The background of the founder seems like he knows what he's doing. So at least we should have a conversation with them. And we actually traveled all the way to go see them in their offices, sat down with them, and they came along a journey with us where now they're saying things like, Karthik, we know that this is a much longer term relationship. This is how we build it. And what else can we do? Can we refer you to our partners? So you can see how the doors are opening. And specifically because of this relationship building approach, even though we are now switching a lot more to cold outbounds and outreach essentially.
Amazing. What's the goal now for the next 12 months? You're obviously coming up to 12 months now. What's the plan moving forward?
Yes. So double down on growth, but also double down on the product experience. So we are in that good, difficult problem where we have several customers using the platform every single day, giving us amazing feedback. But at the same time, we are still, going through the sales cycles with several newer prospects, bigger customers, and also some of the smaller deals are still in the pipeline ongoing. So we find ourselves sometimes torn in the middle where we are like existing customers, we need to absolutely respond to them as quickly as possible and make them happy or keep them happy. On the other side, you have newer customers and we are trying to engage them and get them joining our platform. So where we want to go over the next 12 months is number one, build a product that our customers love and essentially drive an end-to-end customer experience across the product, but also when they engage with ComplyStream as a business. On the other side, we want to start growing some of the existing customer accounts and get them at least a 2 to 3x ACV. So that then means that we are able to maximize the revenue that we are generating from these existing customers. But at the same time, because our product is rapidly iterating, we also want to go back to them and keep giving them these latest innovative features that we are releasing every week. So yeah, that's kind of the high level plan. Let's see how it goes. Maybe you can ask me in a quarter's time and I'll tell you hopefully the same story or maybe a bit more refined one.
I think it'll be a great story to tell in 3 months' time. What would you say is the biggest challenge or hurdle that you foresee in the next 12 months that will hinder you in terms of getting to your goals, or the things that you need to focus on most to make sure you can get to where you need to get to?
Yes. Focus, I would say, is the biggest challenge that a small business like ours face. And especially there are two things at play here. One is we are solving a problem that is extremely intricate and complex to solve. And even though we know that pretty much every financial services business, small or big, faces this problem, that also means that you have some excitement around it that, there is so many customers that you want to solve this problem for. And that then comes to problem number two is where you want to make sure that you start saying no to some of these prospects. Because what the challenge we are facing now is we run the risk of bringing more customers and not actually sustainably grow them. So we also want to look at putting maybe a cap in terms of the customers that we can meaningfully grow with them, but not do it on an unsustainable basis. So, for example, we don't want to hire so many people that it then becomes untenable to operate this business efficiently. So, it is that sweet spot between number of employees and number of customers, and make sure that you deliver on the promise that you gave them when you first met them. So, that's what we are focused on and doubling down on.
A very smart way of thinking about it, and maybe something that not everyone realizes, that if you do want to grow your revenue and your customer profile, you need to make sure your business can keep up. So keeping that balance is quite important. Where are you at the moment? Do you feel like there's still slack or still room to grow on the customer side of things or on the employees? Where is it at the moment in terms of that balance?
Yeah, I would say it's actually both sides. We have room to grow. So in terms of customers, where we are is we are still in the low, single digits and so on. But the idea being is it is by design. We want to make sure that we don't grow unsustainably and then give them a poor experience after onboarding them. And in terms of employees, we are also on the low single digit side, but we are being extremely mindful of who we bring on and making sure that number one, they share the passion that we have for financial crime operations. Otherwise, this can just turn into a hard slog and you don't know why you're even doing it. And the idea then being is, do you have the necessary hustle and the grind to build this business from scratch? And every single day, when I look at the platform, when I look at customer interactions, it feels refreshingly different from where it was a month ago, a quarter ago, and definitely a year ago. Sometimes I don't recognize the business in a good way, and that makes me like extremely proud. And I feel like I would want to be part of this team. And I really want our customers to also feel this way, that they would want to work with this team day in and out so that they can achieve the goals that we promise that they will achieve.
Great. My second last question to you is, you're obviously very new on the founder journey. What advice would you give to someone who's maybe 6 months or a year behind you, just starting their business? What are the key things that you've learned that you would tell them to keep in mind as they grow their business?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking. It helps me reflect at the same time. Two biggest learnings I would say that I have seen and experienced over the last year and a half is number one is focus. And especially the reason you choose to become a founder, again, no one asks you to do it, you do it yourself. It is because of the passion for a particular problem or a particular individual or a entity or a customer, etc. And that passion can work in your favor because it will give you the push to take that leap of faith or the plunge. But at the same time, the passion can mean that it can start diluting your focus because there are so many things that you can do, and you try to go at it in a way where you're like, I want to do this, I want to do that, and I want to do that as well. And there's only finite 24 hours, 7 days a week. So there is only so much you can do. And that could lead to serious issues like burnout, etc. Along with focus, the second element, which is perhaps I would argue is almost the same in importance, is trust. And when I say trust, it is primarily trust in yourself that you chose to take this journey and it is for you to keep taking it forward. And every single time you're up against like a wall of work or someone's pushing back or you're facing resistance, the idea is this is expected to be, especially if you're starting a brand new company where nothing existed. You will get that pushback, you will get that resistance from either the incumbents or the customers trusting you and so on. And a part of this trust is also trust in the people that you bring on board with you on the journey. So for me, the number one thing that I always remember about my team is they placed the faith in me when no one else did. And that trusting them is of more importance, which is what is then, going to hold you straight and keep executing through the journey.
That was very good advice. Thanks for sharing that. And my final question is, if anyone is interested in finding out more about you and about ComplyStream, where should they go to find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Kartik Dabbiru at ComplyStream. And yeah, please look up our website. It's ComplyStream.com. And yeah, we would love to, have a chat.
Kartik, thank you very much for your time.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And yeah, looking forward to keeping in touch.